With the holiday season behind us, a logical next question to ask is, kind of what's next? What will things look like in 2022? Well, when trying to forecast how consumers will respond or behave in the future, I'm reminded of a quote about making predictions. And a well-known Chinese philosopher, Lao Tzu, once said, "Those who have knowledge don't predict, and those who predict don't have knowledge." Well, I guess I'm going to show that I don't have a lot of knowledge because I'm going to try and do a few predictions, or at least show you what some of the other people are saying. And one of the reasons it's so challenging to predict the future behavior of consumers is that the economic news that we've been seeing has been so mixed over the last few months. How will ongoing supply chain issues impact consumer spends? And will inflation concerns stymie consumer spend, which had been buoyed by jobs growth and increased wages at different parts of the end of last year, and are now experiencing different kinds of impact with job growth being a little bit underwhelming as of December, and as we know, some of the inflation numbers increasing very much at the end of the year. And a little bit more about that in a minute. Now, one thing we do know for certain is that consumers are a bit nervous. Consumer confidence dropped steadily from August throughout the end of the year in 2021. And on this slide, we see information from various sources tracking that consumer sentiment. In fact, a few of them reporting historic drops. The well-known University of Michigan index plunged, to historic lows in August before dropping even further with their November numbers. And an HPS Civic Science Economic Sentiment Index also achieved historic lows in October. And the interesting thing that these decreases were happening before any Omicron variant was really out there, or certainly talked about with any great degree, and certainly the number of cases were very low towards October and September, and that as compared to what they are now. So it was really other items, concerns about inflation, energy prices, and the talk of supply chain disruptions that really drove that consumer sentiment downward. Now, we see on this next chart those graphs of those two indexes, and you can see the stark decline that happened over the second half of the year. Thankfully, there has been some rebounding in the last few weeks, or the last issue of both of these indices, showing that maybe this downturn will be a little bit short-lived. But again, that was before the latest inflationary news. The bottom line takeaway on consumer sentiment, and this graph kind of shows things, and you can show it on the next page, Emily. It did change dramatically, and it was pretty universal across the country. Here we have a sentiment index from the Morning Consult comparing the time period of June to December, and you can see that throughout almost all of the states, they turned starkly red or negative in terms of their sentiment over that 6-month period. And again, a bottom line takeaway is that consumer behavior and their thinking can change so rapidly as news changes, and we expect to see those same kinds of things happening in the early part of 2022 as data again continues to evolve and change. Speaking of some of that additional data, inflation. Inflation has reared its head, and concern about it actually in November and towards the end of last year was actually significantly higher than Omicron at that point in time. That was before the explosion of Omicron in terms of cases, but we thought it was very interesting that this had been the case, with a much higher percentage of people being concerned about inflation and that anxiety increasing among higher income consumers as well. And on the next slide, we can see that inflation hits home right away, and we're most easily able to track that in our more everyday purchases, and that's what the data here from Numerator shows us, that grocery price changes from July through October rose substantially on both a year-over-year and a 2-year basis as well. And so that inflation concern has actually become reality. And if you hit the slide one more time, I'm going to bring up one last bit of information that just came out yesterday and today, with inflation hitting 7% in December, the highest rate since 1982. And this marks the third consecutive month where the consumer price rise has exceeded 6%. So inflationary pressures are becoming more entrenched, and we certainly expect some probably some government action, whether that's through the Fed or whatever, to try and stymie that and get things back on track. Now, as inflation takes root, we see an immediate impact upon behavior. A larger percentage of people have already started buying less. In fact, the percentage of people who said they are buying less grew 11 percentage points in a survey that compared data from November to April of last year. And lower income consumers have altered their buying behavior more quickly, with a whopping 44% saying they have reduced their purchases. And that's not all too surprising, because those budgets of those consumers are stretched thin already. So any change in pricing impacts them in a more significant way. Now, buying less is only one option in terms of what consumers can do in terms of their response. Other types of responses that consumers are making are, again, reinforcing that brand switching. They are switching to cheaper brands. They are considering other retailers, discount retailers, getting a boost from that. They are obviously also looking to buy more on promotion or on discounts and looking for sales. And if they can save money by buying in bulk or by buying smaller sizes, those are other options that they're investigating as well, in addition to that stop buying overall. But for certain, inflation is impacting consumers' behavior. Now, their reactions to various prices, as was the case that Gwen mentioned earlier, in terms of different categories growing or suffering more during the pandemic, is true here now as it comes to inflation. Reactions to rising prices can vary considerably by category. So when you think about those care or commodity type purchases, things for a baby, for a pet, so if it's your fur baby, these are least vulnerable to any type of things. Parents are going to invest in those products and pay what they need to get what they want for their children. They may trade down brands or switch retailers, but they're not going to stop buying it. And at the other end of the spectrum, when we think about some gifts or durables, and these include categories ranging from apparel to home and garden, these are the ones that are most vulnerable as prices rise to that actual action of stopping buying, stopping purchases, because these are more discretionary purchases overall, and consumers are really going to take a hard look. And as you can imagine, as well, as they look at their budgets and more dollars are going to the commodities or staples, there's less money for those discretionary purchases, and whether that be beverages, snacks and alcohol, or electronics, there's just less to go around. So as a result of this, we see that there may be a reemergence of that shift to value. That was one of the trends that dropped off of McKinsey's latest report that had been a part of the early part of 2021. But value consciousness is definitely, I think, on the rise and will be a big part of the first quarter of 2022. But value consciousness and value is again more than just pricing. It is a multi-dimensional kind of concept that does include obviously price and that being the most important, but it also includes things like the quality of a product, or how easy is it for me to get it, and the service that I experience as I'm looking for things. That all factors into the value that I perceive around a product or service. And the other thing in terms of the shift to value and or essentials, or being value conscious, is, as Gwen alluded to, in terms of some of the attitudinal shifts, people are asking themselves, do I really need this much stuff in my life? Do I need to simplify? Do I need to make these purchases? Will it increase or make my life better? Will it make me healthier? Will it make my family better or healthier? And they're also very interested in flexible payment options, and this goes into value consciousness as well, or exploring the secondhand marketplace where they can get goods and services for a cheaper price, reselling or repurchasing used items.